It's quite an honor to be asked to give the closing remarks here, so I take this as a serious responsibility, and I want to relate to you what I heard today. I'm a pretty good note taker. You know, I got through medical school and all that, so I have several pages there to go. I want to thank the organizers, obviously, the patients and families, members of industry, academics, and government who are here today to work on this very important cause. I think you heard about my background. Just to give you one little vignette, the Rare Diseases Program in the Office of New Drugs is really dedicated to advancing drug development for people affected by rare diseases to try and support, accelerate the development of these new drugs. And we try to work across different parts of the FDA in different review divisions and different offices. FDA is a big organization, as you may well know, and to try and get some consistency across the different organizations and to try and perform a training function to make sure that people know what they should know about flexibility and development for drugs for the treatment of rare diseases. The patient-focused drug development began in 2012 in response to the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act. There are 24 scheduled meetings. 21 have been held, if my count is right, to date. About 40% were for rare diseases, and they were very helpful because they brought some science and some methodology to the idea of collecting information from patients and families about what it meant to have a rare disease or a common disease for many of the other developmental programs. This really confirmed to us that it's most important to hear from patients and families affected by rare diseases, what's most important to you, and to find out what's clinically meaningful. And that helps us as we do our regulatory work at the FDA. We also found these very useful because they gave us a mechanism to get input from people affected by various disease entities in a way that was not possible before. Previously, we were focused on a particular drug application, if you will, and not a general kind of understanding about having the disease or the disease process. These have been very helpful. And so it was decided along the line that even though we didn't have the resources to continue these internally, and that there are 7,000 rare diseases just to start with, and many, many others, that we thought we would move this out into the community and have these externally led patient-focused drug development meetings, and that FDA would be as supportive as possible of these, maybe providing speakers and so on, as you've seen us here today. We also publish these Voice of the Patient reports, which are online for the meetings that we've held, and you're free to see those on our website. And I'm glad to hear that you're going to do one of these for today's proceedings as well, and we'll put it into our docket. Let me just tell you what I heard today. I heard about your commitment and love for your children and your courage and determination as adults, older children, and teens. I heard about the heavy burden of disease for patients and families, and from your heartfelt descriptions. It's very touching, as I think you know. I shed a few tears today, and I know you did as well, to hear about the trials and tribulations of what you have to deal with on a daily basis and how you maintain hope and how you maintain unity within your community. Part of these burdens are just some bullets that I'll read to you. I heard about the diagnostic journey, which is something common in rare disease community, undiagnosed. The early presentation in childhood for type 1 obviously truncates that journey quite a bit. But I heard from some of the older people who were here today that there were delays. I heard one about 10 years there was a delay in diagnosis. And so that's a problem sometimes, especially as new therapies become available. And you may want to use these therapies earlier and earlier in the natural history of the disease process. I heard about respiratory complications, anything from pneumonia, ventilator dependence, things that put people in the hospital for 3 or 4 months, that these are major complications of having spinal muscular atrophy. I heard about the loss of the ability to swallow and the impact on this on day-to-day life, as well as nutrition and your sense of well-being. There were mobility issues that were raised here, and numerous discussions of the challenges of dealing with the activities of daily living, whether it be feeding, getting around the house, using the bathroom, etc. Fatigue, weakness, and muscle pain were prominent. These are characteristics of the disease, as we heard earlier today, and these are prominent in your minds. We heard about complications, but we also heard about benefits of surgical interventions. Some of these surgeries performed in very young children were quite successful, we heard, and others were not so successful, and we understand that's a conundrum for you in terms of thinking about it. We also heard about managing complicated medical care at home and the impact of frequent hospitalizations, which are often prolonged, and more routine but frequent medical visits. It impacts your quality of life. Something that would be clinically meaningful to you might be to not have to go to the doctor so often. We saw some videos of a boy taken to, I think it may have been CHOP, to have treatment. And obviously that's an all-day journey to get the child ready, to have the car there, to have the 3 ventilators on backup. I don't have to tell you about this. It's straightforward. But these are all things that if there were a treatment, if it could reduce some of this need for ongoing frequent medical care, might be helpful to patients and families. It would be a clinically meaningful endpoint, perhaps, in a clinical trial. There are also the family impacts that we heard about, including social isolation and mental health issues. These weren't discussed in depth today, I don't think, but I can see that clearly there's a tremendous strain on a family structure by having a sick child, any sick child, and a sick child on a ventilator is even that much more challenging. We also heard some good news about some technological benefits that include things like ventilators that are used for very small children. These probably weren't available 20 years ago, and they certainly weren't available for home use. I can say for sure about that. And that these have been allowed to have families care for their children at home without having them be continually in the hospital. Also, the use of computer technology. I heard some interesting ideas about using it to manage aspects of the disease, maybe how to deal with doctors or something. Maybe you could just automatically email them and, program your computer so that you don't have to spend 3 hours on the telephone and that you could get the results that you want. And also that the computers can be used as a mechanism for communication. I think this is a tremendous breakthrough the last 15 years, that things can be done with eye motion, et cetera, to actually communicate effectively between the person who has the disease and their caretakers, the parents and the families. We also heard about and we saw about robotics. I had never seen a device before, and I was actually pretty thrilled to see it and to learn that it works. And we see things on the Science Channel and places like that about total body robotic uniforms, but I think they're still a little science fiction-y, but this was in the real, and it gave somebody the ability to eat, to drink water. It was fantastic. So these are great developments. And then we heard a lot about wheelchairs and power wheelchairs and driving their use down to the ages that are appropriate. And part of that would be clearance probably through parts of FDA, not our part, but other parts to try and get these approved for use by children to show that they're safe. We heard about your views on new treatments and those under development. We heard a lot about your perspectives on that, how you see what's best for me. And we heard about a lot of the thinking that goes on in patients and families' minds when new treatments come out. Does it interact with my particular disease at this time? Is it dangerous? Is it something that would be inconvenient? Et cetera, and that people have to deal with this. And there's no easy way to make these decisions. I think we heard that individual families made individual decisions today. They made an effort to get the facts. They used those facts to make a decision, and then they applied that knowledge and did the best they could for their child. And I just want to assure you that, that your voice, which we heard today loud and clear and in great detail, helps FDA as we perform our public health mission and as we evaluate and approve new drug applications. These are excellent kind of interactions between the agency and people from stakeholder organizations. I just want to say at the end, I want to thank you for including me and for the Food and Drug Administration in your program today. It was a privilege, it was an honor to be invited here today. I learned a great deal. I'm a hematologist, as was said in the beginning, so I'm the only physician here who's not a neurologist, but I do know a little bit about medicine. And it was really a pleasure to hear from so many people and to hear so many really interesting approaches to how you deal with a chronic disease and how you seek to make a chronic disease better. I also want to thank you for fostering the strong sense of collaboration that is helping to bring new therapies for SMA to patients and families. The spirit of this organization, of the Cure SMA group, is really a real example to other communities about how you do drug development, how you raise money, which is not so easy, how you invest that money in trying to advance things from the laboratory to the clinic, how you give out research grants to people who work on your particular project as you move along, how you get interest from regulated industry to try and buy into this. And if I understand the dates right, this has gone from about a process that began in about 2003, and maybe in the clinic roughly 2011, there was like serious thinking about actually doing a trial in humans, to a licensure in the end of 2016. 13 years seems like a long time, and if it's me and my family, it's forever. I understand that. But it's actually quite quick in the grand scheme of things. And to have a technological treatment like this come to market in that period of time, including FDA's accelerated approval in this area, where the review is conducted in 3 months' time. That's about as fast as it ever has happened. And as Billy said earlier, it's based on the excellent data that was submitted to the agency so that we could act on this in the most timely fashion. So then in closing, I want to thank you again for an opportunity to visit with you today and talk to a few of you in the audience. I'm excited, as you all are, that there's a new treatment available. And I'm also excited that there's lots of members of industry here. So I don't think this is the only treatment that will be available. And you'll have other kinds of options in the coming years. You may have these muscular-directed treatments coming up, gene therapies, obviously, off the ground. There's a tremendous amount going on. And I wish you all the best as you move forward in this area. And feel free to contact me if you have any problems that come up with the FDA, and I'll try and resolve them. So thank you again for everything. Thanks.
So I'm just going to make a few closing remarks. I'm Jill Jarecki, the Chief Scientific Officer at Cure SMA, about future drug development. But before I do that, I just want to thank all the panelists for so generously giving and sharing of their lives to help future generations of patients with SMA. I also want to thank all of the caregivers and patients in the audience for having such a robust discussion, and for the people out in the audience and cyberspace for participating. And we look forward to incorporating all of your feedback into the Voice of the Patient report that James mentioned. I want to thank the members of the FDA for participating in this meeting. We really appreciate your collaboration, and particularly to Dr. Goldsmith, Dr. Dunn, and Dr. Bryan for speaking today, and also to Dr. Day. We very much appreciate that. And finally, I want to thank Rose Angel Cruz, James Valentine, and Mahalia Marshall for organizing this meeting, because I think it's given us all a great opportunity to interact and share our voices and talk about the future of drug development in SMA. So just 3 slides on next steps. So we all heard on December 23rd that we had an historic moment in the SMA community with the approval of Spinraza. And it's something that our community has worked for, all of us, for many, many years. The clinicians, the basic researchers, the folks at Ionis and Biogen, who ran really well-designed clinical trials that yielded this very good data. And so we all took a step back, and we really were thankful and excited about the Spinraza approval, and we still are. We know that it will make a huge impact on the lives of all patients with SMA. But after a few weeks of celebrating, we stood back and we said, well, what next? Because we really want to have maximally effective treatments for every patient with SMA, every type, every age, every stage of disease progression. So as an organization, we sat back and we thought, well, what are the things we should think up in the coming year? And one of the things that we, of course, thought about was talking about unmet medical need and what remains even after Spinraza. What things would patients want on top of Spinraza to improve their lives even more? And we've heard about that so eloquently all of today, so I won't really belabor that at this point. But we really thank the patients and caregivers in our community for talking to you about their thoughts on the fact that small incremental improvements are really important to them, that they fear the loss and worry about the loss of the current function that they have today. And although they would welcome large functional improvements, that's something they hope for, but it's not something they necessarily expect. And so we should always keep in mind that how small changes in function can be so critical to the lives of people. They increase their activities of daily living and their independence. And we've heard so much about how important that is. Next slide, I think. So, can you go back one? So also we've heard about the fact that the current outcome measures that we have in clinical trials don't measure certain things that are very clinically meaningful to patients, and we just heard from Dr. Goldsmith about some of those things: respiratory function, pain, fatigue, swallowing, and things like that are very meaningful to patients. And in future clinical trials, it could be important to measure those things more directly than we have in the clinical trials that we have run in the past. So I think that I'll just move on to the next slide, because the patients and caregivers did such a wonderful job in describing what was important to them, and talk about the fact that we still have a number of drugs in development for SMA, and it's important to us that those drugs continue to be developed. And I just wanted to, and I think that I'm thinking about the next slide instead of going on this slide, but no, go back. I'll do this slide first. I rearranged these slides at the last minute, and now I regret that. But anyway, that data suggests that when SMN therapies are most effective when given early. And although we know from the Spinraza clinical trials that they're effective from everybody, that patients who have further disease progression may need different or combination therapies to have maximal effectiveness. And those can include things we heard about today, like muscle modulators, neuroprotectors, and motor neuron, things that change motor neuron function. We also have heard about today that in an ideal situation, we'd have SMN upregulators that have multiple routes of administration. So next slide. So how can we continue to do clinical trials in a quality way after we've had our first drug approval? So obviously, Ionis and Biogen ran very effective and well-designed clinical trials that gave us very clear data that their drug worked. And we want that to be the case for all the other drugs in the pipeline. And these include drugs from a number of our pharmaceutical partners who are in the back of the room, including Astellas, Avexis, Novartis, Roche, and Genentech, Cytokinetics. And we want all of their different drugs to have a path forward. So we're hoping to think about in the coming years, or even the coming months, about what the best way of testing these drugs will be, how clinical trial design will be impacted in the pivotal trials for these drugs now that we have Spinraza. Will we have changes in the use of placebos? Will we have historical controls now or active controls now? Will we be testing Spinraza in the background of new drugs, such as the situation that may occur in ALS with Riluzole? And so I think we really have to think about what will be the best way of designing or running clinical trials in the future so we can have all of these therapeutic options and we can meet the unmet medical need for every patient living with SMA today and in the future. So thank you so much for sharing your input. And it'll be very valuable, and we will come out with this Voice of the Patient report that all of you will be able to provide your input in with these written comments, and we hope to have that out to the community in the next 6 months or so 4 to 6 months. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. We really appreciate your time and sharing during this meeting.